this thing, man, was so well done. I got so much insight. You know, we know all these comedians, and Dean, of course, is here, Dean Edwards, and he can speak to it even more than I can. I'm just a watcher. I've watched everything since that N-Word is crazy. My parents had that album. I had they had Robin Harris's Baby. They had that album. I'm Mom's Mabley. We went to see her last movie because my parents were really into comedy. So I'm kind of a student of this thing, but this
you are.
This documentary, which is what I'm gonna call it, that has Regina King. I forgot her whole. I mean, it's just like you bring in everything. Who started this? How did it come about, Joe?
Guy.
God damn it! Did I do that? I'm sorry. God,
okay.
I did. I'm sorry. It's like Dean set me up.
Do you know how many times I've had sex and women have said that in the middle of sex, Joe? I'm like, oh.
How does that feel?
Well, Joe probably got some kids. Joe probably has some kids out there that's probably mine. But they thought I was Joe, so
no.
Hey, you pay that child support. No, it came about because I just wanted to really showcase Black comedians. This comedy club that was the place to be in South Central Los Angeles. To see Black talent and for celebrities to come see Black comedy was no longer the place to go after the Rodney King riots. I mean, LA was divided at the time. You had in the 90s, you had the OJ trial, you had the Michael Jackson trial that divided, and then the Rodney King trial, before those two just really divided LA. And so industry quit coming to the Black neighborhoods to see Black comedy. And I saw a void and was like, I want to change this because I had an agent and manager at the time already. And I said, there's so many comedians getting overlooked. Something needs to change. And I went to the Comedy Store and they gave me, I guess it was February because I went in January and they said, well, let's try it next month. So I guess that was their Black History gift. But they gave me the worst night of the week, which is Tuesday. Taco Tuesdays wasn't a thing back then in 1995. Right. And they gave me the smallest room in the Comedy Store called the Belly Room that holds like 90 people. And I had a month to make it work. And my God opened those doors because I know I didn't do it by myself.
What was the money like? I'm sorry. I'm just immediately I'm thinking 90 people times the cover price times like did you get the gate, the door and the bar, or what was the split?
The thing about it was never about money for me. I was already working. I was on a Def Comedy Jam tour. I was already doing a couple of TV shows and films, so I was good. And I just really all I got was the door. And I charged $5, and I just wanted to make enough to pay my staff and to pay the staff. And it wasn't until later I started paying the comedians when I moved to the bigger room, the 400-seat room, and that's when I really started paying the comedians. But at first, it was never to make money.
Right, and also let me add this, Karen, because Guy is very, very humble. I've been watching him do the make the rounds. And people have to understand how giving and selfless his brother is. We're good friends, and he's written on Martin. He wrote on Martin. He was a touring comic. He was working so hard. He was turning down going to Janet Jackson parties, and he realized the void, because the void in Hollywood, as it's challenging breaking into stand-up comedy as is, but in Hollywood you had the Comedy Store, the Laugh Factory, the Improv, the big three. In each of these clubs, they had a quota of Black comics, probably Latino comics, and female comics. So, and if they could get a female comic that was half Black, half Latino, they killed 3 birds with 1 stone. What Guy did was he created a room because at the time he brought, and they say it in the special, in the docuseries, they say they brought the hood to Hollywood. People that normally didn't feel comfortable coming north of Wilshire were now coming up to the Sunset Strip to see comics, and countless comics that when, if you make sure you watch Phat Tuesday, all 3 parts of Phat Tuesday, because you get to understand the most amazing comics that became iconic weren't getting burned in this club. And more importantly, Guy's night saved the Comedy Store from closing its doors.
And that's Pauly Shore's Mama's Place, right?
Yes.
As I'm watching. Yep. And you doing Martin, the story of how you became a writer on Martin is to me textbook. Like y'all got to study how this brother broke through. I did watch, so I'm amazed at what you were able to do. But what also was saddened me, we had Richard Pryor, Dick Gregory, Cosby was the number one show. So this is not like a surprise that Black people make money. And so it's almost insulting that you had to convince people, you're on a Def Comedy Jam, which is going around the country. I actually went to one in New York live. Mm-hmm. It was around a line around the corner to get in. You had to have special tickets. Like this was a phenomenon. And that you had to convince people to do this, to me, is insulting as F, because Black people always made money in these spaces.
I mean, Black people have always saved the day. If you look at the history of the United States, for all we built this country up. When they open new comedy clubs, the lineups for the first few months are all Black comedians because they know that's how they can train their staff and get the word out. When networks are startups,
UPN, with the
UPN, the WB.
Thank you.
Fox. Fox when Fox.
Live in Color.
Respect. Yeah. Live in Color.
Living Single, Girlfriends. Yeah.
Martin. You all those.
Yes,
shows.
Martin. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. But also when you look at UPN, I was on a show called Good News. There was a show called Sparks. There was Moesha. They have all these Black shows, and when they tried to go white for UPN, the ratings dipped, and they tried to hurry back and get it, but it was too late. But no, I mean, you're right. I mean, we don't get the respect as Black people as a whole that we should get from for making these businesses profit.
Right. And thrive.
So you didn't take long to prove the case. You didn't take long to prove the case. So then you moved to the 400 room space. And now you got everybody from Magic Johnson and Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal. I mean, you got all of the celebrities come through. And when you knew it was a hit, what was the game plan after that? Was it to franchise? Like what was the next move? Phat Tuesdays, PHAT Tuesdays. What was the move?
I didn't know it was a hit until I started doing a documentary. When you're in, I'm serious.
What?
I was so focused on just running the room, hosting the room. At the same time, I was doing morning radio in St. Louis from LA 5 days a week. So my hours were crazy. I was later on in it, I was married. I was still doing movies and TV shows and still filming. I mean, still touring as a comic. So I had all these things going on at the time. I didn't have time to stop and think, oh, this is successful. I knew people were coming, the Quincy Joneses, like you said, the Kobe Bryants and Shaquille O'Neals, but Prince, Denzel, Eddie Murphy. But I still was just, hey, they just came to laugh. I didn't know it until Michael Blackson said to me one day, we're on a flight together, and he said, man, I miss Phat Tuesdays. Phat Tuesdays launched my career because he got cast in next Friday because Ice Cube was there that night to see Mike Epps, and he ended up getting Mike Blackson and Mike Epps. And so it wasn't until I started doing the research and see what I had in the archives and start talking to comedians. And when I talked to comedians, they were telling me how important it was. I started talking to athletes who used to come and recording artists and actors and directors, and they all said, man, Phat Tuesdays changed their life. And I was like, okay, I guess it was successful. And that's what prompted me to tell the story.
Yeah, it was, Karen, again, let me just say, as a comic coming out of New York, anytime I would go to LA, it was I'm getting goosebumps right now. It was electricity when you would go, you would put in your spots and you say, all right, because usually if comics are in town, they're going to get burned in a lot of the clubs, especially all of the Black nights, the urban nights, right? And Phat Tuesdays was the destination. That was the place you like, I don't care where else I go out here. I want to go on stage at Phat Tuesdays because I know everybody is going to be talking about that particular night. And to go on that stage, it's a stage that's, this is the stage that, Richard Pryor built, Sam Kinison, all these great comics that did their thing and really made their mark. Roseanne, Franklin Ajayi, David Letterman. And you're going in that room and seeing all those pictures on that wall and those names written on that wall. And you're like, yo, I need to perform in this club. And when you did and you won, there was no better feeling.
And Lunel said she said she used whiteout to try to put her name up there. Go ahead, Guy. Torry is here.
That's why I worked so hard for this room to work, because I knew I knew the importance of Black people being in that club. When I first got to LA, and white people would ask me, "Oh, you're a comedian. What can I see at the Comedy Store, the Laugh Factory, or the Improv?" And I couldn't tell them. They made me feel like I wasn't a real comedian, and I hated that feeling for me and for any other Black comedian that weren't regulars at the Comedy Store. And then on top of that, there were a few regulars, comedians who were Black at the Comedy Store and those improvs and those comedy clubs that would come to the Black neighborhoods, and we'd ask them, "Hey, you going up tonight?" And they're like, "No, I got a spot at the Comedy Store." They would rub it in our face like, I'm a regular at the store. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So they were down in the hood peacocking, not going on stage just to rub it in. They got a spot later on that night. So I hated that feeling, and I said I wanted to change that. And doing it at the Comedy Store was actually the perfect place too, because the Comedy Store was the club out of the three that took basically the misfits. If you look at the comics that were regulars at the Comedy Store, it was your Robin Williams and your Yakov Smirnoffs and your zany comedians, your Andy Kaufmans. They weren't the button-down comedians that played the other clubs. So the Comedy Store taking the so-called misfits was the perfect place for other comics that weren't welcome in those other clubs, right. Black comics.
Right.
Dean, do you remember your first set during a Phat Tuesday?
At Phat Tuesdays, I think the first thing I did, I remember the closing bit that I did. I wound up doing on Bad Boys of Comedy a couple of years later. Was Denzel. It was Bad Boys. They had done Bad Boys 1 and 2, so I was like, right. They're gonna do Bad Boys 3, and but it's gonna star rappers, and it's gonna be 50 Cent and Jay-Z, and Denzel Washington is their acting coach, and Chris Rock is gonna direct. And let me tell you something. Getting a standing ovation in Phat Tuesdays, the Comedy Store, son, I'm goosebumps again, man. It was just because also the ego side of it was all the comics, some that you maybe didn't know, they knew you after you did that show.
Yeah.
The victory lap was incredible.
That's Dean Edwards. Guy Torry is here. We're talking Phat Tuesdays on Amazon Prime. It is a must watch, especially if you love comedy. But even if you don't, this is history.